Satnam, yogis and yoginis, hello and welcome to this special video today. Excuse me. Today we're going to do a review, a summary of everything we have been seeing up until now on the first chapter of the Yoga Sutras. Sometimes I call it the first part of the Yoga Sutras, but we can call it chapter 1. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all the videos that we have been doing on this first chapter. There is these 9 videos, and I will remind a few of the key points that were touched upon on these 9 videos. The objective of this video is then to review what we have learned and the valuable lessons that we can find in the Yoga Sutras, to remember some of the key points before we move on to the practice. And maybe some people will want to watch this video like a summary after. If you've watched all the others, then maybe next time you want to refresh your memory about the Yoga Sutras, maybe you don't want to watch all of them. You can come to this video and watch a summary. Or you can watch this video to see which one do you want to see specifically, because you want to go deeper into one of the aspects. So that's the idea for today. And for doing this, I've prepared a little page where I've put the names of all the videos that we have been doing so far. And this is the number of the video, and these are the sutras that I've covered, and this is the title that I gave to the video at that time. And we will go slowly, one by one, exploring what it was about and what was the essence that we got out of that video. So there we go. Let's start right away. Let me just camera. Wait, it's a little bit blue again. Let me just 1 second. All right. Okay, so we did an introduction before starting with video 1. There was an introduction to the Yoga Sutras where I covered the concept of what yoga is, what sutras are, Patanjali, and the story behind the writing of this text. So if you want to know something in general terms about the history of these Yoga Sutras and how is it relevant for us today, you may want to watch that introduction. As we go into the 1.1 and 1.2, these are the 2 possibly most famous sutras of the Yoga Sutras, where Patanjali tells us what is yoga, and starts with the word now. One of the first things that we find in that, the first word in the whole Yoga Sutras is now. So we paid special attention on that video on the concept of now, on the present, on being present and being attentive to what is going to happen. This is, like I said, the hook that Patanjali uses. Like I mentioned, when you are watching a video in YouTube or anywhere else, the first things that happen are trying to hook you, to capture your attention. And Patanjali tells us, now let's talk about the discipline. So now there was a very relevant concept, the concept of the present, and then the discipline. How yoga is, discipline. Yoga is something that requires some effort, requires practice, requires commitment. And at the end of the day, it's a discipline that you have to take to reach the objective that you want to reach with this yoga. And what is that objective? Well, that's the definition of the what is yoga, which is given in the 1.2, and that is what is the objective, this final objective. Sorry, hold on a second. Hello, Satnam. Do you know who was Atma Malik? No, I have no idea. Sorry. Very interesting. Does it have to do with the Yoga Sutras? Is somebody who was teaching the Yoga Sutras? Let us know. So there's the now, there's this discipline, and then in the 1.2 tells us what this yoga is about, and it's introduced the concept of the chitta vrittis. These movements on chitta, on the surface of consciousness, and how consciousness is attached to the mind, and whatever happening in the mind creates ripples on the consciousness. And when these ripples calm down and quiet down, when they nirodha, when they cessate, then we find the objective of yoga. So that's pretty much the beginning, and we introduced here already a little bit about how the mind and the consciousness can be connected, can they be joined together, and how we have a mind and it's like an antenna, and we perceive what is happening in the mind field, and we are capturing the vibrations and the vrittis from around us. So that's also something that we explored on that first video. Now, these waves and these vibrations and the concept of the antenna, let me draw a little antenna here, like an antenna like this, something like that. Ping, 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 ping. This is like our mind, yes? So this is a fundamental concept, and I was also mentioning how the I'm a bit confused now. On the 1.1, that's it, Atta Yoga Anusasanam, there is this word asanam, which is like sitting comfortably and implying that, okay, let's sit comfortably, let's listen in the now, and let's calm down our mind because we have something to listen to. There's some very important message coming through. But what happens if you calm the chitta vrittis? When that's what is explained in the 1.3 and 1.4. So as we moved on to the next video, we did go deeper into this idea of the waves, and I brought a lot of images and ideas and some drawings from engineering to try to explain what is happening with the waves, what happens when we have a wave. Oh, sorry, I have hold on a second because I have somebody calling my door. 1 second. Sorry about that. It was just somebody ringing on my bell. And there is a message from Arbu Zowa. I don't understand everything because I am from Poland. Oh, all right. Well, welcome to the stream. And you were asking about Atma Malik Mauli. I don't know who that is, but let us know if it has something to do with Yoga Sutras. Maybe you can translate with a translator and put it here in the comments so we can all learn about that. Thank you. So I was using this image to see what happens when we have one wave and there's another wave, and how two waves get together, and that can have a certain number of effects. It can be adding and subtracting. It can be two waves in harmony adding to each other, or two waves desynchronized or out of harmony, and they can be creating all sorts of interference and noise and something that is not conducive to the state of meditation. So these waves are our mind fields, and we picking it up through the antenna, how other mind fields are affecting our mind field, and whether there is some interference or there is something that is potentiating our capacity to meditate. So I gave these examples of when we meditate together in a group, and we are all going into this meditation state, and that helps us as well, and we get in tune and we all go into the meditation state. That also goes when we are mantra chanting and we are singing at the same rhythm, and then we have a certain melody and there is a harmony, and then you got in tune, and that's also helping. So this idea of the waves and the modulation as well, we cover that concept, the carrier wave and the modulating wave. We explore this in detail, and then we say, well, the idea was that when these waves, when these chitta vrittis calm down, what happens? Well, that's when the self abides in its true nature. That was 1.3. Yeah. So when that happens, so what is yoga? This is discipline of yoga. Yoga's chitta vritti nirodha. So the chitta vrittis have to come down, and when they come down, the self is going to abide in its own nature. That's 1.3. So the self comes back to its nature. And its nature is partly awareness. This is what we call self-realization. So to realize the self. When the chitta vrittis come down, we realize who is the self. Yeah. And otherwise, what happens? Well, otherwise 1.4. Otherwise, we get identified with our thoughts. And that's an interesting thing, yeah? What is our identity? We identify with our real self, with who we truly are, in our essence, or are we identifying with the chitta vrittis? So this is what is being conveyed in the 1.4. And there was a few drawings that I did here. You may remember the prism that is looking out, and in the surface there is this vrittis, there is these little waves. And then when you look at yourself in the mirror, instead of seeing a happy, smiling face, you see something very distorted because of these chitta vrittis. And then we emit some judgment on what we see. And then this disturbs our peace because we are self-critical. So this was because of reflection, yeah, the reflection concept. Reflection capacity of the brain and the self-reflection, and what happens when the surface that is supposed to be reflecting something else that is affected by these waves, these chitta vrittis. How is the self-reflection going to be affecting what we see? So how much is affecting the perception? So that was 1.1 to 1.4. It already contains a lot of the essence of the whole Yoga Sutras. And then Patanjali goes deeper. And the third video, I was like, okay, so if we need to count down these chitta vrittis, what are they? Well, we said there is five different kinds of vrittis. And Patanjali enumerates that was the right knowledge, there's the wrong knowledge when we are going into fantasy, and there's also sleep and memory. Those were the 5 different kinds of vrittis, which if you look at them, you remember when we were exploring them, it looks very similar to the 5 different states of consciousness, something we have explored in other videos. And so it's interesting that Patanjali is telling us, well, there's vrittis, there's movement on all these 5 levels of consciousness, whether it's your regular knowledge of the day-to-day, that could be right or wrong, or whether it's your state of fantasy when you're imagining things, or in your sleep, and in your memory, in what you remember. No? So a vritti in memory, for example, would be how having an experience in my life will color my memory, and that memory that stays like a vibration that is going to affect my perception now. So these are the 5 different kinds of vrittis, and I forgot to mention the 1.5 actually before Patanjali goes into the 5 vrittis. 1.5 was saying, look, all these types of vrittis, they can be what he called the klishta or aklishta, yeah, which is a couple of ways of translating it. There would be coloring and uncoloring. So there's the concept of colors. But it could also be translated as suffering. We already started to talk about pain and suffering and the difference between both, and how we are programmed by our biology to avoid pain and seek pleasure, but how that could take us in a wrong path, especially in the modern kind of life and society that we have right now. How seeking pleasure and avoiding pain is taking us down a karmic path, and how sometimes the path towards self-realization is going to be through suffering, or let's say through pain. And I did make a difference. It doesn't have to be suffering. You could be through pain and not suffer, because pain is necessary. Just like one of the definitions we were having of yoga is a discipline. Yoga is a discipline. It means some effort, as you know. Later on, Patanjali also tells us about this effort. So 1.5 was this: the vrittis can be colored or uncolored. It can be suffering or not suffering. And then in 1.6 was telling us the 6. And then it goes 1.7, 8, 9, 10, 11 is giving a bit more deeper description of these 5 different kinds of vrittis and explaining a little bit more about those. And we made this connection to the levels of consciousness. And if you remember, we used this image of the sea. And we saw how one vritti, maybe here on the subconscious, insecurity can be creating a bubble that reaches the surface of our consciousness, and that creates a number of thoughts. So my own insecurity can create a certain number of thoughts that could be bringing suffering. So that was the message that we were getting from this video. The next video was very important as well, 1.12 to 1.16. The very 1.12 is the sutra in which Patanjali introduces these two key concepts, abhyasa and vairagya. This idea of scales. Let me read the message first. Do you know something about Kriya Yoga, because they're talking about self-realization? Yes, we've covered Kriya Yoga a few times in the channel, and it's Kriya Yoga is a concept that is maybe not mentioned by name from Patanjali yet. There will be concepts that will be explored in the practice in the second part of the Yoga Sutras. Today we are doing a summary of chapter 1, which is the main message of how to get to Samadhi. Chapter 2 is the practice, and we're going to start that next week. And the practice will include yoga, and it will include the practice of Kriya Yoga. So yes, that will be coming up. We will talk about it next week. But Kriya Yoga, it's just part of the practice. There could be different variations, and there is again also different kinds of Kriya Yoga. So I have never taken classes on Kriya Yoga. My sister has. I've never taken classes on Kriya Yoga, but I've read the book from Paramahansa Yogananda, who you can find over there. And he talks a lot about Kriya Yoga. And my understanding is that Kriya Yoga is a royal yoga, it's Raja Yoga. And it's a great way to get to this Samadhi. And it's very specific in the practices so that it can guide us in the same path that Patanjali sets for us. So Patanjali tells us about what to do with the senses, what to do with the breath, and so on, and the energy, and to go into meditation. And through Kriya Yoga, you would be doing practices to follow those steps. So yeah, maybe that's going to be very relevant to when we go into the actual practice for starting next week. Yeah, particularly, I think it's 2.26 in the. It will take a few videos to go into the 8 steps of yoga, according to the Patanjali's Eightfold Path. But it's very exciting what's coming up. So let's continue with the summary. And here we have abhyasa and vairagya. These two concepts is like scales, and you put one on one side, the other on the other. And one is keep up. Yeah? Keep up is the abhyasa, the practice. You have to keep up the practice. And vairagya is all about let go. Yeah? So how paradoxical it is that both concepts are important. We have to keep up our practice, but we also have to let go of attachments. And there's also an attachment to our practice. And so these two play a game. They are balancing each other, playing with each other. And so the 1.12 was introducing this concept of the scales of the keep up and the letting go. And then in the 1.13, he was going a bit deeper into saying, look, the abhyasa, the practice, requires effort. Thank you for subscribing to the channel. Thank you. That's very kind of you. Satnam. So abhyasa is about keeping up. It's about, it requires effort. This is what 1.13 tells us. And 1.14 as well. There's not only it requires effort, but it has to be an effort that has to be sustained for a long time with no breaks and with devotion. And we talked in that video about when we do 40 days meditation, 90 days, or 120 or 1,000. Satnam John, hello, welcome to the stream. Long time no see, it's good to see you here, Satnam. So Patanjali tells us, look, practice is a key ingredient. There's practice and non-attachment. And in the practice has to be an effort sustained for a long period of time with no breaks and with devotion as well. That word is also very important because we may go into the practice of yoga in a very systematic, very analytical, practical way, but, more from the mind and less from the heart. And he tells us, look, there has to be devotion. It's a very key component. And Patanjali tells us about devotion again. He will come back when he goes into Ishvara Pranidhana. He will go into that concept as well. So we will come back to the concept of devotion. Now, so there's the keep up, and then there's the letting go. This is the keep up the practice, abhyasa, and there's the let go, the non-attachment. And when we saw the non-attachment, we saw the difference between being detached, attached, and non-attached. I don't know why I put attached in capital letters. Maybe because it's like the place where we are the most. And this is particularly relevant, particularly relevant to those who practice householder yoga. We had a conversation on this with my sister Seva Kaur on the channel last week. So we had a conversation about the difference between the classical ascetic path of yoga, the renunciate, and the more modern and practical, because most of us live with families, we have a job, we have to earn some money, we have to pay our bills. And so what happens with all these teachings? Well, particularly the concept of attachment, that's particularly tricky, because if you want to hold a family, there has to be some attachment. There's going to be some attachment implicit in the couple and with your children. So there has to be a special relationship to the attachment for those who are walking the householder path, I believe. So, but yeah, that's 1.15 would be then telling us about this different becoming desireless for objects. So even if you can be non-attached, so this practice of non-attachment is the desireless. And yes, we have to consider how it's lived in the householder path. But then there is also the 1.16 would point out to the final supreme non-attachment, like one final stage where you are not attached to anything, and even to the gunas. And now when Patanjali tells us that not even to the gunas, he is referring to this walking up the path. This is a drawing from Samkhya philosophy, and how we go from the attachment to the senses and the enjoyment of the senses and the stimulation of the senses, going up even beyond the gunas and reaching Purusha, the self, going back to the consciousness and to the self. So he's telling us this is the path to go, guys. My voice is cracking a little bit today. I will have a sip of my tea so that I can continue. So that was video number 4. Again, if you want to go deeper into any of these, you can go back to watch these videos and reflect upon them. This was the little fishy that was blowing bubbles. I think it would be nice to have an image on this. The image, in one image, we can remember a lot about what we said in that video. Yeah, we did a special on samadhi. That special on samadhi, I'm going to group the special and video number 6, because video number 6 is all about samadhi. But first of all, in the special, we went through the sound of sa, the sound of ma, the sound of di, and I went through what is this sound? What does the sound mean by itself? So the very sound of S is the sound of the Kundalini, of the snake, of the serpent that is waking up and rising through the spine, and we did a journey up through the spine of this yogi who is sitting in meditation, and there is the Kundalini energy going up, and the samadhi. So the sa was the vibration of something that is wholeness by itself, and the seed as well. And ma is like the mother nurturing, and the di is the holding. And the path of samadhi is like going up the spine. We did this little journey and we explored these sounds individually quite in depth in that video number 5, that's special on samadhi. And then on the next video, that was number 5. And on the video 6, that's when we explored 1.17 and 1.18. And we went into this. It's a first description of the types of samadhi. Patanjali will later going to tell us a little bit more about these states of samadhi. And even later on in the Yoga Sutras, I think mainly in chapter 4, he will say a little bit more about that as well. But this is our first introduction to samadhi. And he tells us, well, samadhi, basically he is classifying it as sampragnata samadhi, and there is asampragnata samadhi. Yeah. And this sampragnata samadhi contains these 4 different kinds. There's vitarka, vichara, ananda, anasmita. In relation to the gross objects, subtle objects, ananda is the bliss, and asmita is the I amness, the consciousness of self, let's say. And so he describes a little bit about this. It really goes into much more depth on this here on the 9th video, on the 1.41 to 1.51. But here we already saw a little bit about this, particularly in the 1.70. That's when he introduces, look, there is these 4 different kinds of sampragnata samadhi. Now, a sampragnata samadhi would be the one when there is no object. But there is still some impressions left. There is some impression. I connected it to the samskaras and the seeds of karma that are left in the deepest layers of our subconscious and conscious. So in a sampragnata samadhi, there's no object, but there's still some impressions left. In sampragnata, there is an object, and this object can be gross, it can be subtle, or it can be bliss itself, or it can be the feeling of I amness. And when we talked about this ananda and asmita, I did mention how these 4 in this case, reminded me of the 5 koshas, and how in the 5 koshas we have the 5 layers, sorry. And one of the layers is bliss, as we are transcending the Annamaya kosha and Manamaya kosha, Pranamaya kosha, Vijnanamaya kosha. So as we go through this, I don't know if I said them in order, but the mind, the energy, the body, as we go through all of this, the most subtle is the bliss, the kosha of bliss. And even that is not our essence. So our essence goes beyond the bliss. Even though, when we talk about the definition of who we are in yoga, we say we are in essence Satchidananda. And there is this Sat, there is the truth and the reality of who we truly are. Chit is consciousness, so a true consciousness and consciousness of the truth. And Ananda, Satchidananda. So when these 3 are connected, when these 2 are connected, the truth and the consciousness, there is a bliss as well. And yet, if we look at the koshas, bliss is not the final one. As you cross through the bliss, then you can come to the Atman. Yeah, these 5 layers, let's say, they are covering the innermost essence of being, which is the Atman, the self. So that's in the core. Yeah, we could do this like the self or Atman, and there is these 5 koshas going around, yeah? And we are going deeper. When we go to bliss, we are getting very close, but we can go even deeper and go into the actual self, into the self. All right. So next video, we talked about 1.19 to 20. Now we started to group 10 at a time, 10 and 10 at a time. And it was a bit faster. We were moving a bit faster through the different sutras. This one is effort and the devotion to Ishvara. So he's saying, look, if you've gone through all this effort and you got to a sampragnata samadhi, so if you experience samadhi and there was no object, but there is still some impressions left, there is still some seeds of karma, you're going to have to come back to life, because the seeds of karma create the effect of having to come back to life. But if you come back to life, you are much more drawn towards the spiritual path, and you are much more, let's say, capable of accessing these levels of samadhi naturally, or much quicker or much faster, just because of the previous spiritual effort that you did in another life. So that was 1.19, telling us, look, if you've already been to samadhi before and you reincarnate, so as you come back to life, you will explore samadhi again. You will have another experience of samadhi. But if you haven't, on 1.20 it says, otherwise, you're going to have to, what is called, that was 1.20, the fivefold path. And it takes 5 things, and is the faith, the practice, remember the path, and remember to keep yourself constant in the path. In this pursuit to a samadhi, that's the fourth stage, and keep meditating and keep focusing your mind and getting to a point and focusing on first gross objects, then subtle objects, then the bliss and the essence of self. So going through all this, and the 5th point was pragya, it was wisdom. So through all this experience and this practice and remembering the path and the faith, you obtain certain level of wisdom. And this is like five different steps. I said, look, these fivefold path, these 5 steps on the path towards samadhi, you're going to have to do it with 2 things, 2 components, very important, with intensity and conviction. And some people will do it with very low intensity, but a lot of conviction. So maybe you can only, let's say you work very hard, you have your family, you have other duties, and you only have like 15 minutes a day. But when you sit down those 15 minutes, the conviction that you utilize in that, and in some way, if we can say like that, it can be also very intense, those 15 minutes, yeah? But let's say you cannot afford to be 5 hours meditating, but those 15 minutes can be with such conviction and intensity that it could make a big difference, no? But we can read it in this way as well. 15 minutes can also be with a lot of conviction and a lot of intensity. So I wouldn't say that low intensity means very little time, because you can be doing 11 minutes with a very high intensity. You can be meditating for 2 hours with very low intensity. Yeah, you can be 2 hours and they're like, and your mind is thinking something else, and it's not that you don't believe in the practice, you do, but you don't have that much energy to put into it. Today you are not feeling in the mood. You are doing it anyway because, discipline and effort and no break in the practice. So I'm going to do it, but you don't put that much intensity into it. That could be. So that's intensity, but conviction can also be. You could be doing something, and even intensely, but you're not very convinced about it. You are not sure of the fact that this is going to go. And in a way, you can have certain level of doubt. And doubt can cloud everything, and it can be sabotaging any experience that you have, because you have some sort of experience, then the next day you're going to be doubting it. I'm not convinced. I don't know. That was my mind. I imagined it. So the level of conviction can be going down. This is very connected to the concept of doubt. All right, so that's 1.21 and 1.22. Then he goes into what is Isvara, and we did explore in this video the different names of God and how Isvara has a particular place and how we relate to every name of God in a particular different way. And Isvara has different translations and different connections in different texts in different places, but we can say that this is like the most. It's Purusha in the most. Sorry, let me bring this diagram again. So more into this side Purusha, which is not affected by these levels, not affected therefore by the gunas and the tattvas and the karmas that are generated by all this, and is Purusha in the most pure state and unmodified and unaffected by everything that goes below. So we could say that that is what is Ishvara, and therefore that's something when we need to keep our devotion to. So devotion to Ishvara, that's a very important component. I already mentioned faith, and now we come back to the concept of devotion here. And he's saying, well, look, Ishvara was the first teacher, before the very first teacher. Yeah, you had a teacher, your teacher had a teacher, and you go back to the beginnings, at the very beginning of, Krishna, and who taught Krishna? Okay, so there's Ishvara behind all of this, and is like the first teacher. And there is something that is very associated to this origin of these teachings, and that's the symbol of Om and the chanting of Om. And so Patanjali also tells us about the relevance and importance of the pranava, the Om, and japa. Repeat this pranava, repeat this vibration of the Om. And if you do that, the obstacles go away, and then you come to rest in the self. That is the end of this 1.29. Yeah, as you with intensity, with conviction, you have devotion. Yeah, devotion to this representation of God as Ishvara, and then chanting the Om, and through this Om, japa, 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 and then all the obstacles will go away, and then you come back to rest in the self. Yeah, the self comes back to rest in its essence. Yeah, it comes back to the essence. So that was very nice. 1.30 to 1.40. Then he say, well, you're just saying that the obstacles are going to go away if we do this. Which obstacles do you mean? Well, there is actually 9 obstacles. And we went through them. There was disease, the laziness of the mind, laziness of the body. There's having false views, having craving, sensuality, and others like that. We can, if you want, you can check those videos. There's 9 of them. I don't know if I know all of them by memory. Oh, doubt was one of them. That's one that I remember. So I think it was, yeah, doubt. So we were just talking about this conviction. He's telling you, look, if you lack conviction, it might be because there is some doubt. So I'm going to write it here. Even though there's 9 of them, yeah, there's many, but this doubt is going to be very, very important. Also because it's going to cloud our capacity to be devotional. Yeah, doubt and faith are like 2 sides. Yeah, but these 9 obstacles have then 4 consequences. And there was the suffering. Yeah, that was one of them. Sukh, and we did saw Sukh Dukh. The difference between Sukh and Dukh, like Dukh would be the suffering and Sukh would be the peacefulness and being content with life. And then there was the sadness and despair. I'm just going to write sad, anxiety. And the 4th, that's going to be very interesting, he says irregular breath. It's interesting because these 3 seem to be like moods and emotional states, and the 4th is something that seems to happen in the body. But I mentioned he is building up. He is telling us, look, breath is going to be key. And actually, we talked about how it is key to connect the body with the mind, with body, emotions, mind, and spirit. These 4 levels are all connected through the breath. And Patanjali is very, very clever. He's already starting to introduce something here that will come up on chapter 2. When he goes into chapter 2, we will see how pranayama and utilizing different kinds of breath to control the prana, the energy, is going to prepare us for pratyahara, what happens with the senses. And we saw this when we were going from the 130 to 140. He was telling us, look, there is a certain attitude that you can do with the... did I miss something? There's these 4 consequences, and he's saying, well, look, focus on your practice, make your practice true, and then there is certain attitudes that you can do, be friendly towards those who are happy, be compassionate towards those who are, so towards the sukh, towards the happy, be friendly, towards those who are sad, be compassionate. If you find somebody somebody virtuous, don't be jealous, but be joyous. Somebody virtuous, so you are joyous and not jealous. And if you find somebody doing something wicked or evil, then just have some sort of indifference. And we talked about this in detail, the effect of having indifference towards the wicked, and can that be karmic as well in some way? And we explore that in that video, so if you want to see more, you can go more in depth. After he goes through the how we can relate to these different people, he says, well, now let's talk about the breath. He says, didn't I say that one of the 4 consequences is irregular breath? So let's regulate the breath, particularly exhaling and holding without breath. And that's going to help to calm the mind. It's telling us already, pranayama is going to lead towards pratyahara and dharana. So he's doing through the irregular breath. So he's telling us about the breath, the importance of the breath, and how, from the 35 to the 40, he was going that the breath is going to help us also to deal with our sensory experiences and not get attached to them. And then if we go beyond the level of the sensory experiences, we're going to see and relate to the inner light. Inner light. That meditating upon that inner light is going to help us be free from desires and focus on our consciousness. He's telling us different ways that we can do to deal with these consequences, to overcome the obstacles. He gives us a few different things. You can focus on the inner light. You can focus yourself on the sensory experience and refine it. You can focus on the breath and exhale and let go. You can focus on different states of consciousness, meditating on the different states of consciousness. And then on the very last one, 1.30, almost that one, 1.39, he says, do all of that or whatever suits you. It's like a wild card, or, if there is something else that is helping you, then do that. And just do that, the focus of your meditation, and may you achieve mastery through that. And he describes mastery like being able to focus on the smallest atom or the biggest universe. Like the focus of your mind can go into any direction if you are a master of that. So he's giving us an open door to include here whatever practice is going to be more suited for us to reach that state. But through these practices, we can overcome the obstacles. And then, through the inner light, and the inner light is the light of the self, the light of the Atman. And through this, we can go to Samadhi again. We reach the Samadhi. And so here we go. We came back to Samadhi, and just like here, he went again into this, particularly Vitarka and Vichara, but he went into a little bit more of details. 1.41, he was telling us, look, that mind which has managed to calm down of the vrittis, and you overcame the obstacles through your practice and the intensity and the conviction, and the vrittis have calmed down, that mind becomes like a crystal. And just like a crystal, it can take the qualities of the 3 things. It can be like, when I am looking at a thing, I am looking at an object, there is me, there is the looking, and there is the object. So that crystal, the mind on a very purified way, can be reflecting, it can be taking on the qualities of the object, or the senses, or the one who is utilizing the senses to sense the object. So we are first outside, and then we perceive that we are looking through the eyes to see that object, and then who is it looking? Oh, I am looking. And so we are going, drawing back towards the center of consciousness. He says, so this crystal mind can be focused and can take on the qualities of these 3 things in the 3 levels. And he says, well, let's go back to this Savitarka and Savichara. Well, Vitarka and Vichara was here in Sampragnata Samadhi. And he says, well, actually there is 4 different ones. There's Savitarka, There is nirvitarka, savichara, nirvichara. And this is focusing on a gross object with mental movements. So I'm looking at a flower, I'm thinking about the flower. Nirvitarka is focusing on the object, but no mental movement. So here, there is no thinking about the flower, I'm just perceiving the flower. Still, the flower is a gross object. We can go into instead of vitarka, into vichara. Vichara is subtle. From the flower, we appreciate maybe the beauty or the grace of the flower. And there can be thoughts around grace, about the concept of grace. They are subtle. It's not a flower, it's more subtle than a flower, it's the quality. And maybe as I am purifying this, as I'm going more into this is with object, this is without, with mental movement, this is without mental movement, this is gross, this is subtle. So as we go even more subtle, you can be in grace with no movement of the mind. And so we are moving in kind of like this. Yeah? Savitarka, nirvitarka, savichara, nirvichara. And as we are, this is like 1.42, 3, 4, 5, something like that. And he's saying, well, as you are moving through these are all savija samadhi. Savija means with a seed. And remember I mentioned there is impressions, there is a seed. And here I mentioned how Patanjali utilizes this word seed. And in the commentaries I've seen seed can imply both things. It can be seed as an object, like you're meditating on an object, whether it's gross or subtle, whether it's a flower or the beauty of the flower. But seed can also be like the seeds of samskaras that are left on the deepest layers of ourselves, the impressions on the consciousness. So as long as we are within this field, there is a seed. And that's Sabija Samadhi. And the more nirvichara, the more the non-thought perception of a subtle object, like grace, and the more we establish ourselves in that state and the more it flows, then we are coming into contact with what he calls it the luminous self, Atman. He says the luminous Atman. So again, you see, when we are talking about different forms of meditation, it's telling us about focusing on the inner light. The inner light is connected to the Ananda, and we can see this is coming into the luminous self. And through this self comes a certain wisdom, a certain jnana, prajna, which is filled with truth, and it's not perceived with the mind. This is not something that we understand with our right knowledge. You will remember the 5 ritis, right knowledge, wrong knowledge, and fantasy and all that. One of them was right knowledge, that we can get through reading scriptures, or somebody's telling you something, or you have an experience and you understanding and you analyze it. Well, the kind of prajna that you can receive, the kind of knowledge or wisdom that you can receive through this contact with the luminous self, that is not the same kind as right knowledge. It's not a vritti. This is just a perception of truth and perception of the essence of something without having a movement of the mind. As you more flow into this nirvichara and you are residing in the luminous self, and your wisdom and what you perceive comes without a vritti, without an analysis or mental analysis, then we are coming into a new state, a final state. Is it coming here already? It's telling us that then there is not going to be thought, and the impressions are going to be wiped out. Yet all this was sabija with seed, and these seeds of samskaras, the samskaras, as we are going into the luminous self, that's going to go into the impressions and it's going to erase them, and that's going to take us to the final nirvija, Samadhi. The final state of Samadhi, where there is no more seeds, there's no samskaras, there's no impressions, and there is no need to reincarnate. We don't have to go back because we are liberated. So this is the liberation. This is the final objective. When he was talking about the chitta-vrittis, he was, we want not just the chitta-vrittis to come down, we actually want to get here. He had to said, pay attention, we're going to talk about this. And then, okay, this is where it's taking you. And that's chapter 1. Very profound. I hope it helps to see it all in one page, like this. I have another diagram like this, a map with every one, 1.21, every one of these in much more detail. I'm going to be sharing that one that I have, that I prepared for doing these videos. I will share it with the members of the channel. I've promoted this sometimes. If you feel these teachings are valuable in any way and you feel inspired to contribute with the channel, you can become a member. And so I will be, every now and then I want to share something with the members, and I haven't done much, but I'm going to share this more detailed map, like this one, but more in detail with the members, so that if you want to study the Yoga Sutras by yourself, you can have a path and a map to guide you and know which sutra do you want to pay more attention to. That was my idea. But hopefully today was a useful video to, if you have been following along, to remember everything and to notice it's quite a lot and it's very profound. And 9 videos, if you've reached here and you watched all of them, I congratulate you. That's a big commitment. That's a lot of intensity and conviction to be able to, to put all that effort and energy into watching all this. It's already, I appreciate your commitment and your capacity to stay. So that's great. And this is the map of what we want to achieve. Now, from next week onwards, we're going to start the practice and how we can get there in a more practical way. Because Patanjali could have just said, that's it, this is the philosophy, I wash my hands, I don't want to know anything else. But he didn't. He actually said, well, okay, now let's go into the nitty-gritty. Let's go into the different steps of what we actually have to do to get there. So I think that's phenomenal. That's coming soon. I'm very excited. I hope you are too. But for now, thank you very much for watching. If you liked it, don't forget to click the like button, share it with other friends, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and write comments in the video how it went for you. And see you next time. Thank you everyone, and thank you everyone who is watching online right now. Like John, hello, thank you John. And everyone who is a member like John, thank you very much for your contributions. And John, wait, because I'm going to share this document online in a minute. All right? Thank you, everyone. Sat Nam.